Hi, I'm Nelson Fortenberry, and today I'm going to be talking about nuclear testing, the ethical problems of tests during the 1950s and onwards. We're going to be primarily talking about atmospheric tests. Exclusively, we're going to be talking about atmospheric tests. These are tests that happen in the atmosphere. That's different than tests that are done underwater or underground. Um, let's just get started, huh? Okay, so this is our overview. First, we're going to start talking about a few different tests from the first test, Trinity, onwards. Then we're going to go into the ethical problems of these tests, how they are morally and ethically wrong, how they were mishandled, things of that nature. Then we're going to be talking about the actual ethical systems in which we can determine things being ethically wrong or right. First, we'll be talking about the anthropocentric view, and the deep ecological view will come second. I'll explain these further once we get along. And then the final part is going to be a little special section about nuclear technology, and we'll get to that when we do. Okay, so, our first test that we're going to be talking about is Trinity, codenamed Trinity. Trinity was the first nuclear bomb ever detonated. It was the precursor to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was detonated on July 16th, 1945, in New Mexico, and it had the explosive force of 20 kilotons. A kiloton is a measurement of the explosive force of a bomb. In this case, it's 20 kilotons of TNT. So it's just a way to gauge the yield of these nuclear weapons. 20 kilotons, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki were right around that same explosive force. So we'll continue. This first image is the tower that Trinity was tested with. Unlike a lot of tests, this was done in a tower instead of being dropped from a plane or shot out of an artillery piece or other such methods to bring the detonation. So Trinity is an interesting and important test to be talking about because it is potentially the most ethically understanding test. It's the test that has the least amount of radioactive material going throughout the atmosphere. People were It's one of the most ethically sound tests because no one knew what this new bomb was going to do. There had never been a nuclear explosion before. No one had ever detonated one of these before, and so the top brass, the engineers and the scientists, were all very wary of putting people too close. They didn't really know what this nuke was going to bring, and so they were pretty careful about it, which is not the same as some of these other tests. Some of these other tests were blatantly destructive to human lives and non-human lives. So this next image we have is just a shot of the explosion of Trinity, 0.025 seconds after. And you can see down at the bottom, there's a little gauge, 100 meters. So this explosion just, less than a quarter of a second after it has been detonated is already massive. These images are fairly common when you are looking up nuclear weapons. Fairly interesting image, in my opinion. Now, again, I can't stress this more, is that Trinity is unlike any of the other tests that we're going to be talking about because it was controlled it was a test that didn't have the repercussions that others had. So that's an important thing to remember about Trinity. Is it was a rather ethically done test, which is odd to say about nuclear testing. So the next test that we're going to be talking about is called Castle Bravo. Castle Bravo was a hydrogen bomb, which is not the same as an atomic bomb, developed after the atomic bomb. Much more explosive yield, and different methods of beginning the nuclear process. It was detonated on March 1st, 1954, and it is the most powerful nuclear bomb detonated by the United States. It had a yield of 15 megatons. 1 megaton is 1,000 kilotons. Trinity was 20 kilotons. So we're talking massive levels of magnitude with these new bombs, with these hydrogen bombs. So its yield was 15 megatons. The issue was that the developers, the scientists and the engineers, expected a explosive yield of around 6 to 8 megatons, which they didn't get. They got twice as much. The implications of that are astounding, and we can see in this image. This is a picture of the detonation, and so this nuke was massive, way bigger than they expected it to be, which is one of the moral and ethical positions that this test in particular has problems with. So the yield of this detonation was much larger than expected, and the they didn't have things in place to protect the people in the Pacific when they were doing these nukes, especially Castle Bravo. They expected it to be an 8 megaton. Turns out to be 15 megatons. And then wind affects everything, right? So nuclear material is distributed throughout the Pacific, throughout the atmosphere for that matter, throughout the world because of these atmospheric tests. So that was one issue. One thing that I would like to point out in this slide is you can see here this blue area is where Castle Bravo was blown up, detonated. The dark blue is the actual crater from this nuke. That was not the original atoll on Bikini Atoll. And down in the bottom right corner is where the men that detonated the nuke were. So I think that's a striking image because you can really see how powerful and destructive these nukes really were, and that's still there today. So we're going to continue talking about the ethical problems of Castle Bravo for a little bit more. So it has the highest radiation contamination by the United States. Like I said, they didn't know that it was going to be so big, but it was. And wind, ocean patterns, all of these things affected the amount of radiation and where it went. So there was this ship, the Lucky Dragon number 5, in the area that got hit by radiation. One man died. Everyone was sick. One man died from infection a few days later. And there were inhabited atolls around hundreds of miles away that were severely irradiated. And unfortunately, these atolls were not evacuated until 48 hours after the explosion. So that's a full 48 hours for people to be irradiated and to die. Of all of there was, out of the 29 children on Rongelap, 20 of them suffered from thyroid tumors. So we're talking on, the chances are so high of getting a cancer or radiation sickness. Um, so we're talking some massive problems with the way that these tests were carried out. Um, Bikini Atoll, there were people living on Bikini Atoll that had to be removed from Bikini Atoll. They still can't live there. Uh, and we can even see that even if you are not evacuated, that you're miles away from this nuclear detonation, that you potentially aren't safe. Okay, so the next test that we're going to be talking about is the Tsar Bomba. And the Tsar Bomba was the most powerful nuclear explosion ever in history. Uh, it's greater than 2 times the explosive force of Castle Bravo. So it had a yield of 50 megatons of TNT, which is massive. And the Soviets, they actually reduced the potential yield from 100 megatons to 50 megatons because they didn't really know what was going to happen. There's some important things to know about this nuclear explosion. One of them is this image actually. This image shows the mushroom cloud that was produced after the explosion, and this picture is taken from 100 miles away from the mushroom cloud, and the mushroom cloud is at 35 miles in the air. Massive. I mean, we're talking the level of explosive force with a nuke like this is unreal. One of the issues with the Tsar Bomba was there's a village nearby or around 55 kilometers away from ground zero of where the Tsar Bomba was blown up, and every single building in the vicinity was destroyed from 55 kilometers away. Um, People's houses were destroyed. All people's windows were blown out, and you could feel the explosive force from hundreds of kilometers away. So the ethical implications of this are twofold. This was a test, but what if this was designed for military use? I mean, it's designed for military use. It was dropped from a plane, but it hasn't. We haven't ever seen something like this in warfare. We only really see this during tests. But let's continue. So this is an example of the fireball that was at the beginning. So we can see in the middle, the pink dot is Fat Man. The bomb dropped on Nagasaki. It was 18 kilotons, less than Trinity. And at the beginning, it had a fireball of 0.1 kilometers. Then we go higher, we can see Castle Bravo is the big orange circle that had 15 megatons and 1.42 kilometers fireball in size. And the Tsar Bomba was 2.3 kilometers. And this was just the initial fireball. These get bigger. So you can kind of see the level of destructive force that these big bombs have. So let's talk about the ethical problems of these nuclear tests for a bit. One of the biggest things that happened is this radioactive contamination. Radioactive contamination we're talking from the soil on the ground to the humans that were nearby when when bombs went off. Various complications come from radioactive contamination. You can get radiation sickness, where you have internal bleeding, you have nausea. It's problems are multiple and extremely bad. And then obviously you have cancers. You have high rates of cancers. Just like I was saying during Castle Bravo, 20 of the 29 children began to see thyroid tumors. So we're talking 1,000% chance of getting cancers from nuclear contamination. So that's just one of the issues that we see. Another is loss of habitable land. big nukes go off, you're not going to be able to live in the place that you normally lived for thousands of years potentially. And obviously loss of arable land, because if you have radioactive soil, you're not going to grow food in that radioactive soil unless you're going to get you're going to get radioactive material, and you're going to ingest it, which is a whole issue of biomagnification. And one of the last ethical problems, and potentially the most important, is the loss of moral agency. When governments detonate nukes for testing, they take away the moral agency of the people that are living by or just nearby the test. So, for example, the people at Bikini Atoll, where Castle Bravo was detonated, they didn't have a choice. They were forced to leave. The U.S. government gave them stipends to move, to leave their traditional home. They didn't have a choice in this. They weren't asked. They were just forced to move. And then we have other groups of people who weren't forced to move, losing moral agency because a nuke goes off and they happen to be downwind of it, and all of this radioactive material hits their island chain. And then we see all of these massive medical issues that come along with this wave of radioactive material. But these people, they can protest, they can say no, but that doesn't mean that countries like the United States are going to stop these tests. So all of these ethical problems are real and have serious implications. So now we're going to talk about a little bit more of the actual ethical systems, how we can determine if things are ethically sound or not. Let's see. So the anthropocentric view is a view that is primarily about humans, ethical system. So that's to say, if we were talking about an environmental issue and we were using an anthropocentric view, let's say there was an animal that was vital to human life on this planet and it was dying off. We would say that we have to save that species, that animal, so that humans can live. So that's an anthropocentric view. The way we can view these nuclear tests through an anthropocentric lens, because one, it had hurt hundreds of thousands of humans' lives. People died. People got cancer. People had birth defects afterwards. So from an anthropocentric view, this is an unethical thing to be doing, these atmospheric tests. So again, it took away the moral agency of people. They didn't have choice. They couldn't say no to these countries that were doing these tests. So again, it ruins potential natural resources, which is an important thing from an anthropocentric view. You detonate a nuke in water, and it's going to irradiate the water. First of all, it's probably going to kill life. Whether that be coral or fish, whales, but also it can destroy habitable land, arable land, like I was just talking about. So the chances of losing potential natural resources are immense with these kind of tests. Okay, so next we're going to be talking about the deep ecologic view, which states that all life it has moral agency. All life is important and has the right to survive and thrive. So let's say from environmental perspective, we have instead of the anthropocentric view, which says that we're going to save the species so that we can save humanity, we're going to save that species because it has an inherent right to exist and to thrive. So from this perspective, we can also map onto these tests. Thousands of non-human animals died. We're talking the fish in the ocean. We're talking the types of coral life. We're talking the sheep that they put on the ships during these tests to see what happens to a body when it's close to a nuclear explosion. Another, we're taking away agency again. The potential to thrive is lost by a lot of these non-human animals and humans, for that matter. I mean, we can still view this deep ecological perspective through humans too. Um, one issue is that we don't know how much fallout has happened, how much fallout was spread throughout the world. These atmospheric tests blast this, almost microscopic radioactive material throughout the atmosphere, and eventually it will, envelop the atmosphere. So one nuke goes off, and uh, radioactive material will flood the atmosphere and go throughout the world. So I mean, there's no test for this. We don't know how many, or how, there's not a quantifiable amount of radiation that we can really tamp down on and figure out how much damage we've done to our own atmosphere and all of the ecosystems that exist within it. So another thing that is challenging through this deep ecological view is that whole ecosystems can be destroyed by these nuclear tests. Tests like the Tsar were so big that they can destroy hundreds of kilometers of forests in a second, and whole ecosystems, animals, plant life, uh, will be destroyed in an instant. So, from a deep ecologic view, we can see that a lot of these atmospheric tests are not ethical by any means, and even from an anthropocentric view. So, one thing to take out of this is that whatever ethical system we use to determine what if these tests were wrong or right, they predominantly show that they were unethical actions for the most part. Uh, People weren't told, uh, restrictions weren't made. So these problems are a multitude. Uh, but on a slightly different note, we're going to change it up a little bit and talk about Chernobyl for a little bit. So, Chernobyl is a famous nuclear disaster. It happened on the 26th of April in 1986, modern day Ukraine. This was a level 7 event, which is the highest level nuclear disaster. Uh, 31 people died, and 20,000 years before humans can habitate that area. So basically, what happened was this reactor number 4, had a meltdown and irradiated the area of the exclusion zone, or what is today called the exclusion zone. So this is the elephant's foot. That's a mass of melted concrete and nuclear rods that were inside of the um, reactor. So that's it's one of the most dangerous amounts of radiation in the world. It's still massively irradiated. You can't get close to it, or you'll get so much radiation you die on the spot. Okay, so the exclusion zone was originally 19 miles in every direction from the plant, which is huge. It's a huge zone that people lost their homes and the places that they live and work. One of the interesting parts about it, though, that I really want to talk about is it's become this impromptu wildlife preserve, which is odd because we have these tests that ruin the environment and kill human lives, but when it comes to providing nuclear energy and there's a meltdown, uh, it's the other side of the coin. Human technology hurts them, and then out of the ashes comes this interesting wildlife preserve. It's an interesting moral and ethical situation that this certain area has found itself in. So this place is thriving. These wolves in this image are probably irradiated, but they seem to be doing okay. Uh, it's an interesting sort of lighthearted note towards the end of this show. Uh, it's an interesting implications that we have this technology, and in this case, this technology was just used for energy, and also brought about a unexpected and potentially good outcome that these animals and this other non-human life can thrive in this zone where humans won't be able to touch it for a long time. Well, that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed my PowerPoint on nuclear testing and the ethical ramifications of it. Thanks a lot.